The invoice that didn't belong to the month was stapled to a stack of cafeteria orders and one wrinkled slip for glue sticks. It was a Wednesday, the kind that starts with fog from the river and ends with a chalk smear on your jacket you will discover in the yogurt aisle. I teach literature and civics at Lyceum No. 17 in Kamyanka, a post-industrial city that sits in a bend of water and memory. When the wind is in a bad mood, you can still smell the old sugar factory on the south bank, though its chimneys have been quiet longer than my seniors have been alive. Room 304 has 14 desks that wobble according to a timetable only they understand, a clock that knows nothing of minutes, and a window that lets in the heat like a rumor. On my desk there is always one bouquet of pens that refuse to write and one student's drawing of a teacher with heroic hair that bears no resemblance to my head. My name is Mikola, though most of my students call me Sir in English now that they've decided it is cooler than Panivkaitel. I am an ordinary teacher. I give notes their paragraphs did not ask for. I keep the attendance book shyly and never finish my tea while it still remembers heat. If you stand outside my door during last period, you'll hear me tell teenagers that feelings are data, not conclusions. The invoice, one sheet of paper pretending to be confident, was for LED streetlight modernization, Phase 1, pilot, payable to Danube Illumination Group, LLC, 17,800,000 Ukrainian hryvnias. There was a line for smart control gateways, a line for consulting, and one for oversight services. Oversight of what the paper did not specify. Authorized by Deputy Mayor for Infrastructure, O. Kravitz. Payment status. Complete. I was supposed to be checking the Lyceum's electricity bills against the city's reimbursement letter, a bureaucratic ritual we perform twice a semester so that no one can later say they forgot to sign something. But the streetlights sat there on top, bright as a confession. We had joked about those LEDs back in autumn when entire neighborhoods kept flipping to a low-wattage twilight and nobody could tell whether it was an economy measure or a cosmic joke. Now the number didn't look like a pilot. It looked like a second airport. "Everything okay?" asked Svetlana from the student newspaper, leaning around my door with the posture of a person who intends to get an answer even if it means becoming an inconvenience professionally. "I'm reading the city's bedtime stories," I said. "They don't rhyme." She picked up the invoice and squinted. 17.8 million for Phase 1? How many lights would that be? "Enough to make the moon jealous," I said. "But see the word pilot? Pilots are supposed to be small and ask you to fall in love before they ask you to marry them." Svetlana wrote pilot on her palm like ink could make the number behave. She is one of those students who pretend they don't care, then organize 3 events while telling you they are lazy. She tucks her hair behind her ear when she is deciding whether to be reasonable or useful. Useful usually wins. "Do you want to write about it?" I asked. She hesitated, and I loved her for the hesitation because it meant she already understood the difference between curiosity and appetite. "Maybe," she said, "but I thought we were doing the piece about the canteen meatballs." "We can do 2 truths," I said. "You'll need documents. Ask the city for the contract. Ask who else bid. Ask what pilot meant in February." "Can I say please in the letter?" she asked. "Or is that unprofessional?" "Always say please," I said. "The law requires them to answer. Your manners don't. Our law on access to public information is clear enough that I can teach it without calling my lawyer friend to make jokes about commas. You write, they reply in 5 working days, they either send you the thing, explain why they can't, or pretend they didn't see your email. All 3 are data." Svetlana drafted the request in English, she's practicing, and Ukrainian, because she knows kindness. She CC'd the Lyceum newspaper email we'd set up to look grown and sent it to the municipal clerk. She put the word please in twice and added, "We are students," once. At lunch, I went down to the basement where the bursar keeps her kingdom and asked about the invoice. Yakov, who has guarded the Lyceum's finances since Chalk was confident, shrugged like a man who has seen numbers flirt and then marry someone else. "They bundled payments to the schools with the municipal ones," he said. "They want to reimburse our electricity later from savings," they said, so they sent everything together. The city has a new software. The software confuses itself. "Danube Illumination Group?" I asked. He shrugged again. The mayor mentioned them at a ribbon cutting. A friend of a friend. Bright men. They made a presentation with 20 slides and very gentle verbs. The mayor, Malyshev, is the kind of person who shakes your hand like your hand has a camera. He wears blue suits because blue forgives. He smiles with his teeth like a man who thinks the city is a client. He is not a bad man in the cartoon sense. He is a man who has learned to ask in ways that can be defended. I tell my students, assume incompetence first, then hunger, then crime. The order will save you some apologies. For 3 days we did not hear back. During those 3 days I taught sentence structure to sophomores who believe commas are conspiracy, graded essays with adjectives injured beyond recovery, called a parent to say their son had made a metaphor that deserved a cake, and walked home along Petrov Street where 3 lamps out of 5 were working at a confidence level of maybe. On the 4th day, a reply. The clerk, who owes her calm to a childhood spent in a house where politics slept in the next room, wrote that the contract with Danube Illumination was signed under a restricted procedure due to urgent efficiency requirements. She sent a PDF of the contract, 34 pages of promise and grayness. There were clauses about warranties and a curious line stating that performance verification shall be carried out by an independent entity appointed by the city manager's office. There was no list of competing bids. A schedule said, Phase 1, Pilot, 1,200 luminaires. There were photographs of street corners that could have been anywhere. There was a signature from O. Kravitz, deputy mayor, and a neat little ink stamp from a company called Luminova Verification Services, accepting the task of oversight. 1,200, Svetlana said, counting. At 15,000 each, that's no. Let's not do math faster than we can apologize, I said, but my stomach had already pulled a face. Who owns Luminova? She asked. Good question, I said. Ask the registry. We looked. Luminova was registered to an address on the edge of the industrial district, near the decommissioned rail yard where weeds perform patients. The owner of record was a firm in Odessa. The director's surname matched no one we knew in the City Hall directory. The authorized contact email was a free account. It smelled like a company that had been assembled in a weekend out of leftover syllables. In second period on Friday, during a discussion of whether Antigone is an anarchist or a civil servant with better bones, my phone buzzed in the pocket of my jacket hanging sadly from a chair. It was a number without a name. Mr. Mikola, said a man's voice that squinted. Friendly advice. Focus on teaching. These things mislead. You do not want students to be disappointed. I teach them how to be disappointed without becoming boring, I said, and hung up. I do not enjoy being brave, but I enjoy giving good lines to other people's recordings. Then I took a breath so my seniors wouldn't see it. When the bell rang, Danilo hung back. He is the kind of boy who grew tall before his sentences did, whose hands arrive before his ideas. He wears his jacket like a negotiation. Sir, he said, I think my mother's friend knows the deputy mayor's cousin. Should I ask her? Ask her for soup recipes, I said. Ask questions through doors everyone can see. The following week, the Lyceum's main entrance dress rehearsal for spring turned into winter again. The corridor smelled of wet wool and disinfectant. The photocopier had opinions. I had 3 classes back-to-back and a meeting with a parent who wanted to discuss whether her son's drawing of a dragon could count as a literary analysis. If the dragon quotes the text, I said. If the dragon quotes the text. After school, the student journalists gathered in 304 with the kind of pizza you buy when you hope your parents won't see the receipt, and we did the slow, unphotogenic work of reading. Svetlana had requested the delivery notes for the luminaires. The clerk produced 3 pages of serial numbers and a map of pilot locations. Roman crawled the city streets with his bicycle and joked that he was a moth doing investigative journalism. He came back with photographs. The lights had been installed on some blocks early and some blocks not at all. On 2 corners, pilot meant the old orange sodium lamps had been switched off entirely for 3 nights while a crew measured baseline darkness. People complained on Viber. The city said it was calibrating. Where is Luminova? Asked Roman, mouth full of a theory. At the edge of town, Svetlana said. Would you like to go meet it? I should have said no. I should have said this part is for adults and quiet. I did the math of risk and realized my students already live in a country where risk is not a theory. I'll go, I said. You will sit here and email polite questions about who is on the oversight team. The Luminova address was a warehouse with a rolling door that had never learned to be embarrassed by its dents. A sign printed on an office printer announced Luminova in a font that does not remember vowels fondly. I knocked. A man opened with the expression of someone who has been interrupted in the middle of an alibi. Good afternoon, I said. I teach at Lyceum 17. I'm looking for the oversight reports from the streetlight pilot. He blinked like a man consulted by the weather. Reports? The contract says you do performance verification, I said. I assumed that includes measuring what was installed and whether it works. We submit to city manager's office, he said, recovering his voice. We don't share directly with citizens. Students are citizens, I said, which is a convenient arrangement for me. He shrugged. Ask the city. I have, I said. They sent me the contract with your name on it. May I see the lab? He made a sound like a gull evaluating a French fry and then shook his head. We do field work, he said. We don't have lab. What's your methodology? I asked. We test lights, he said, and closed the door. On the way back I stopped at the river. The ice had broken early in a petulant way and great plates of it drifted downstream like the city was throwing dishes. Somewhere above me a crane made an old house forget what it was. I took a breath like an accountant and filed this day into the mental folder I call stuff you cannot unlearn. 2 days later the mayor posted a video on his page. He stood beneath a brand new LED in a neighborhood that had voted. He said words like smart and modern and efficiency and European standards. He thanked Deputy Mayor Kravitz by name. He did not say pilot. The comments were kind, then angry, then kind again, then an ad for teeth whitening. That night my tires were fine, but my mailbox was not. Someone had taped a printout to it with my face taken from the Lyceum's website, my name scrawled in black marker, and the word trouble underneath with the O missing as if they'd run out of letters or confidence. I took it down because I didn't want my downstairs neighbor, who spends his days sweeping the courtyard like a meditation, to think his broom had failed. In the morning I told no one. At lunch I told everyone. The parents did not need a meeting to decide whether to help. The city had already taught them how. They began showing up in 300 for saying sentences like, "Do you need a spreadsheet?" And "I can stand by the door with my body if that helps," and "My cousin works in procurement, but not that kind." A group of mothers formed a Viber chat called Thursday Committee, which alarmed me because Thursday has always been when I grade in despair. They assigned themselves topics. One would research the registry of the oversight firm, one would request the minutes from the procurement committee that recommended Danube, one would convince her brother to photograph City Hall's lobby without getting thrown out, which she did with graceful competence. It escalated on a Wednesday afternoon when the principal called me into her office. Ms. Bonder is the kind of principal who knows how to look scandal into behaving. She pours tea into cups whose saucers have written more of this town's history than the archives. "Kolya," she said, "I received a call from the city manager. He is concerned you are politicizing students." "I am," I said. "I'm teaching them that the city is theirs and costs money. And he is concerned about the word corruption appearing in an article your newspaper intends to run." "It doesn't," I said. "We wrote pattern." "He would prefer you wrote misunderstanding," she said deadpan. I laughed, then apologized for laughing, then apologized for apologizing. She slid a document across the desk with 2 fingers. "He asked me to remind you of the rule about public statements," she said. "The district prefers statements go through the district." "The district is busy," I said. "So are you," she said. "So am I. Be careful anyway. They tried to move me by moving furniture." "Just for the week," said the schedule. I switched to a room without windows that knows how to ring. "They tried to move me by moving fear." "Administrative leave," said an envelope from HR. "May be considered if disruption continues." I informed my union representative, who has the quiet vocabulary of a person who can hold a system to itself without raising her voice. Write everything down, she said. Say everything twice. That weekend the parents came to the Lyceum with mops as if to prove we were the boring ones. They washed the floors so thoroughly my shoes apologized. They left notes on the board. Questions are not rude. Adjectives must pay rent. Someone brought a cake that said pilot in frosting and then apologized to me for misusing a question mark where a colon would have been better. On Monday we published. The student newspaper website is not built to handle storms. It braced. The headline was dull on purpose. Who watches the lights? The subhead was less dull. A map of Kamyanka's LED pilot and what it cost. The piece included photos of the lamps labeled with their coordinates, the pages of serial numbers with the curious gaps, 200 missing as if the city had been unable to count or unwilling, and a paragraph in simple Ukrainian that said, "We are not accusing. We are asking. Our receipts are here." By noon, the mayor's office posted a response. It used transparency for times. It used misunderstandings once. It did not use the words Luminova, pilot, or Danube. The deputy mayor posted a photo of himself shaking hands with a man in a hard hat who looked like he had doubts about everything but lunch. At 5, a journalist from the regional TV called. "We'd like to film in your classroom," she said. "No," I said. "You may film outside, where my pupils can run away if they dislike the framing." She filmed outside. My students stood in a half circle and said coherent things into a microphone while I pretended to be just the weather. Svetlana spoke in English because the TV woman had asked and because she wanted to prove a point to someone she will never meet. "We do not hate our city," she said. "We love our city enough to ask how a pilot became a budget." That night the phone rang again. The voice this time belonged to someone who had been instructed to be friendly by someone who hasn't met human beings. "Teacher," he said, "please, this is bigger people's business. Bigger people can speak in public like smaller people," I said, and hung up. Then I phoned a parent who works at the police station because I do not enjoy it when stories learn to walk into the dark. Wednesday morning, 2 men in suits no color should admit to came to 304 and asked permission to speak to me in the corridor. They had the kind of smiles men wear when they are doing someone else's bidding and understand nothing of the fee. "Mr. Mikola," one said, "we're here on behalf of the mayor's office to clarify process. You mustn't alarm students." "My students alarm themselves," I said. "I am merely here to keep their alarm accurate." He handed me a sheet of paper, an invitation to a closed working session to discuss communication protocols. It was scheduled for Thursday at 7:30 a.m. in a room I knew because it smells like old files and new paint. "Be careful," he said, quietly, while his partner pretended to admire the hallway's collection of photographs of the Lyceum's winning debate team from 2011. "Always," I said. "These are children." After they left, Svetlana came to the door and raised her eyebrows. "Friends," she said. "Wolves in borrowed sweaters," I said. The closed session happened as advertised. Around the table, the mayor, the deputy, the city manager, the head of procurement, the superintendent, our principal, and me. On the wall, a clock that loves 8:15 because it has never learned to travel. The mayor began with the generous tone men use when they have been told to be generous. "No one is punishing learning," he said. "We value your work. We ask only that you trust the process." "What is the process?" I asked. "So I can teach it properly." "The process," said the deputy, "is that experts decide what is needed, the council approves, procurement carries it out, and verification confirms." "And what is the process when the verifying company's office is a door with a printer sign and the procurement committee consists of 3 cousins?" I asked more politely than this sentence reads. The head of procurement looked at the mayor. The mayor looked at the city manager. The city manager looked at his thermos. "We have hired an independent auditor," he said. "They will review contracts from the last 18 months. The superintendent shifted and drank water like a man trying not to cough during an aria. "We have also received complaints," he said, "about you, Mikola, for politicizing and for harassing public servants. I am required to investigate. Will you investigate the tire that made my student's mother late to work after a nail appeared in it overnight? I asked. Will you investigate the door that doesn't latch anymore in the new wing, even though we paid for rehabilitation last year? Will you investigate the word pilot and its new meaning? We must stick to what concerns the district, he said, pained. It concerns the district, Ms. Bonder said, so softly everyone had to lean forward to hear. The street outside our building has not had a consistent light for 3 months. The mayor raised his hands the way you calm a horse you should not have mounted. We are all on the same side, he said. We want a modern city. I want a modern receipt, I said. I left the meeting with a written caution about communications, which is the bureaucratic cousin of a scolding, and a sentence in my head that would not leave. Bigger people's business. The students staged a walkout without telling me. They are smarter than my experience and kinder than my fear. At noon on Friday, they stood under the half-working lamp in front of the Lyceum and held signs that had been written by 3 languages and a conscience. We trust our city when it shows ITS work. Pilots do not cost this much. Students are citizens. Where is Luminova? A mother I did not know stood to the side with a thermos labeled for voices, and poured tea for anyone who spoke. On Monday, the city council chamber filled. I have watched that room decide the fate of swings and sidewalks. I have watched it pretend to reinvent democracy with a fresh font. It is not a glamorous room. It has a smell of carpet and impatience. The clerk called the meeting to order with a bell that expects very little. The first hour was goat permits and a zoning deviation for a bakery that wants to add a second oven. Then public comment. Parents went to the mic and said, please and thank you, and what does pilot mean in procurement language? And, do you think we do not know how to read? A student read a paragraph about the time she walked home from dance in February and the lights on her street decided to be shy. A retired engineer explained lumens and why you cannot save more money than exists. A man in a suit who introduced himself as a representative of Danube Illumination said words that sounded like they had been purchased in a set. Safe, efficient, best practice partnership. He smiled at the room as if it were a hostile witness he nonetheless respected. In the 4th row, I saw Luminova's borrowed sweater man. He watched the floor like he had a friend under it. He left before the vote. The council voted to authorize the independent auditor to examine all relevant contracts. The mayor said, "We welcome the review," and his voice did not trip on the welcome. The deputy said nothing. The city manager looked at his phone the way some men look at the last train. 2 days later, I was placed on administrative leave, pending the outcome of a review. The letter was polite. It came with 3 bullet points: possible policy violations, possible intimidation by association, possible misuse of school resources. Bullet points are cruel because they pretend to be neutral. The union said, "We will respond." And they did, with a letter that could have cleaned the glass in the mayor's office. I sat at home and learned the rhythms of my building when I am usually elsewhere. The upstairs neighbor listens to radio plays at 3 in the afternoon and does laundry at 9. The cat in 2B has a coat like a winter coat you cannot afford. The courtyard collects rumors like a sieve collects water. "Are you okay?" asked a text from an unknown number I recognized as a student by the punctuation. "I am bored," I replied, and meant it. The students did not wait for me. They published a second piece that consisted only of documents with key lines highlighted and questions phrased so politely that politeness became a threat. The parents began a petition that did not ask for anyone's head. It asked for the contract to be rebid, and for the city to adopt a rule that anyone who recommends a sole source contract must swear under penalty of losing their job that they do not benefit from it. A father named Victor who builds kitchens started bringing coffee to the clerk's office because she is the person at the center of our storm who whispers 5 days means 5 days. The Thursday committee became a rotation. One parent at the procurement office reading files. One at the council chamber watching who walks in and out. One at the city website taking screenshots in case the internet decides to be tidy at an inconvenient moment. They wore the uniform of a democracy that has learned to stop being romantic. Comfortable shoes and patience. At night, I played chess with myself and lost. I wrote my mother a message telling her I was being told not to talk and that I had not obeyed. She replied with an emoji of a kettle and said, "Take tea to the secretaries. They are the true gods." I took tea to the secretaries. They looked at me like I had finally understood a first-week lesson. The auditor's report landed a month later with the thud of a fat bird. It did not use exciting adjectives. It used nouns with good posture. It found that the pilot had been priced using anticipated bulk rates rather than actuals, which is a way of saying they guessed the discount. It found that Luminova's verification consisted of 3 site visits and 2 sets of photographs, one of which belonged to a different city with a purple tram. It found that Danube's shipments were missing 216 luminaires. The variance was explained by optimization. It found that the deputy mayor's brother-in-law held a 5% share in a company that held a 50% share in a shell that held Luminova's registered address. It found that the council had been told pilot would be small. It had not been told what small meant. The report did not say corrupt. It said incompatible, insufficient, non-transparent, undocumented. Sometimes nouns are enough. The mayor accepted the city manager's resignation for health reasons. The deputy mayor announced a leave of absence and did not return. The contract with Danube was suspended pending retender. Luminova's sign fell off its door. The city attorney took early retirement with a pension that deserves an audit of its own. The clerk received flowers from 3 unknown numbers. My leave was lifted. "We regret the inconvenience," said the letter, which is a phrase that makes you want to test adhesives. I returned to 304 with a new window latch and the old chairs. The students applauded and then immediately pretended they had not. Svetlana handed me a copy of the city's new procurement policy. "Look," she said, "we made them right. Clause 12. 4. No recommending official shall have any direct or indirect financial interest in any vendor considered for a restricted or sole source procedure. Any such interest shall be grounds for immediate disqualification and referral to the Anti-Corruption Council." Clause 12. 5. All pilots shall be limited to 5% of the anticipated total project size, absent a supermajority vote of the council with detailed justification. Clause 12. 6. All verification entities shall demonstrate independence through ownership and governance disclosures. I taught A Midsummer Night's Dream that day as if fairies are not corrupt. At lunch, parents came to say the words that always arrive late to these parties. "Thank you." I told them I had not done anything you cannot do with a printer. They told me that this, in fact, is the point. A week later, we held a small party in the courtyard. Someone hung a string of bulbs that worked as promised. Someone brought a cake that said no adjectives without receipts. The mayor came and stood near the punch and made jokes about the breeze. He shook my hand and said quietly, "You made my life difficult." "I intend to continue," I said, "because sometimes we deserve a line from a movie." He laughed genuinely, like a man who understands that difficulty can be a vitamin. "Keep your students busy," he said. "We will need them to watch the new contract." The new contract was dull. It had 3 bids. It had a spreadsheet where the numbers stayed in their lanes. It had a schedule that was too modest to be wrong. It had a verification plan written by an engineering department at a technical university 50 kilometers away, and a student who looked like Svetlana's cousin would be in charge of calibrations. I read it like a bedtime story and finally slept. We did not break the system. The system was not a statue. It was a tangle. We pulled on one bright string and made 3 men sit down. We taught 14 teenagers how to file requests without making enemies of the secretaries. We proved to ourselves we could say please in a room where other words wanted to be loud. We learned to describe, not accuse, long enough for the nouns to find each other. There were still emails that used your in a way that made my eye twitch. There were still nights with footsteps I could do without. There were still days when the lights behaved like they had never met a standard. But now there was also a Thursday committee that refused to go dormant. They show up at council with babies, with strollers, with a grandmother who glares like law. The clerk's office now includes a small plastic sign that says 5 days means 5 days. The Lyceum newspaper has a style guide that forbids adjectives before documents. Sometimes, at the end of the day, when the building empties and the maintenance crew takes the school back into its proper custody, I sit in 304 and watch the river turn its body. The warm glow outside is not movie perfect, but it is honest. In the distance, the old factory's windows hold the street back from dark. I think of the phone calls and the closed door, and the men whose suits were the color of inconvenience, and I am more tired than I knew I had a right to be. Then I think of Svetlana's neat handwriting, and of Victor bringing coffee to a clerk, and of the day Ms. Bonder decided to say one sentence louder than her job description, and I feel like a person in a long hallway who has figured out which door opens when you push, and which opens when you pull. The spring after the audit, my seniors asked whether we could do a boring club. I thought they were joking. They were not. They meant a club where we read agendas before meetings and translated them into human. They meant a club where they would carry toddlers at hearings so their mothers could speak into microphones without worrying about nap time. They meant a club where they would write the clerk thank you notes with the nouns spelled correctly. I said yes. We meet on Thursdays. We drink tea. We make lists of verbs that keep cities alive. File, read, ask, wait, show up, repeat. Svetlana graduated in a blue robe that made the old people cry. In her speech she said, "It turns out the most romantic thing in the world is paperwork." The parents clapped like their palms had been waiting a decade. The mayor smiled the smile of a man who has learned to read minutes. The new deputy mayor, a woman who can tell a contract from a promise at 10 meters, sat 2 rows back and held her niece's hand and nodded like someone who knows the next storm is already making its way across the map. After the ceremony, as the courtyard lights clicked on, slowly, efficiently within the budget, a boy I had taught 2 years ago came up and said, "Sir, it was cool when you were suspended." "It was good theater," I said. "No." He shook his head, impatient with metaphor. "It was cool that my mom stood at the microphone. She never does microphones." I said, "That is the only compliment I will keep." Sometimes I walk home down Petrov Street with my collar up because the river likes to lick faces in April. The lamps do their best. Under the third one from the corner there is a bolt that sticks up unforgivable. I have tripped there twice. I should file a request. I will. You cannot save a city in an email, but you can send it an email that will make it save itself inch by inch, bulb by bulb, sentence by sentence. When I reach my building, I look up and there is the moon which has never once submitted a receipt, and I forgive it because it is beautiful and cheap, and because we did not need it to sign the pilot. We needed each other. We still do.